Hi there. We're really excited today because we're launching a month of really trying to tackle the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you don't know what they are, don't panic, because that's what this month is all about. I have got a list of them, so I will show them, and I'll be linking to some videos about them. And every day this month we'll be having a conversation on the Facebook page of the Frugal Family, but actually loads of people are getting involved. And I'm really excited to launch it this evening with Sian Conway. And I met Sian through Twitter quite a long time ago now, when you started having an ethical hour every Monday at 8 o'clock. So we're just sneaking in before that. We'll all be off on Twitter after this, to really just engage people that are working in or trying to work in sustainable, ethical, eco, all those different words we use, ways. And when I thought about doing Plastic Free July, which is what we did last year, I kind of felt like plastic as an issue was now quite mainstream, and people had heard about that and people were dealing with that. And I sort of thought, well, that's out there now. What do we need to get out there next? You know, we shouldn't just stop when we come across something. We need to keep ploughing on. There's lots and lots of issues that we need to start tackling around sustainable living. And so I looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I have to say I found them a bit overwhelming, because I didn't know how I personally, number one is poverty, you know, how am I personally going to tackle poverty? And I thought, well, if I feel overwhelmed by it, then probably lots of people do. So let's just have a look at them all together and see where we can come up with ideas and support and help to get us through it. And I knew Sian would be the person who would be really good at that part of it. So welcome, Sian. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you and where you're at? And then perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, it's great to be here, and it's great to be kicking off Sustainable Development Goal Month and Plastic Free July. I think a really good month for all this awareness work to be happening, so that's fantastic. So thank you for taking the lead and bringing us together to talk about the SDGs, which are one of my favourite topics. So I'm the founder of Ethical Hour, which, as you said, is basically a global network for people that want to live and work more ethically and sustainably, from people that are at the very beginning of that journey and have no idea where to start, because we've all been there, right through to people that have really embedded this stuff and have gone completely plastic free, completely zero waste. But we're all about no guilt, no shame, embracing where you're at, and then taking small steps to make changes where you can. And the Sustainable Development Goals are really at the heart of all of that work. So they can feel a little bit overwhelming when you first look at them, because there's 17 of them, and they are talking about the biggest issues our society is facing. So like you said, no poverty is number one. We've got zero hunger in there. We've got climate change in there. Plastic isn't its own goal, but it covers a lot of the different goals, like life on land, life underwater, for example. So, you know, they're not issues that you single-handedly are ever going to be able to completely eradicate or change, but they're really a roadmap for the global community, which includes governments, businesses, grassroots organisations, charities, and us as individuals as well, to really come together and play a part in tackling those issues and really creating a sustainable, better future for all of us. So they're at the heart of the work that I do. I'm a marketing specialist, so I work with ethical and sustainable brands, and all the clients that I work with are aligned to the SDGs in some way, shape or form, whether they know it or not. Some of them don't, and what we do is talk about how we can embed that. And I also give back to causes aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals as well. So a percentage of my revenue goes into good causes that are aligned to the goals, so that I'm playing my part as well.
Yeah, and it's cool. That was one of the things I wanted to do, is I don't feel I necessarily can tackle all 17, or I might, you know, my home life, for example, might be more suited to one or two. And I think that's a really powerful message, is that it might just be you use them as a kind of framework, or you might think about, I know on the SDG website, which is the United Nations led, you know, they tackle one each month. They have like a whole month thinking about that one. So it's not that you have to be doing all 17 24 hours a day. Do you find that you've sort of felt more affinity with one or two? Are you focusing on one or two, or are you looking more broadly?
It can be difficult to narrow it down because they're all such good causes. When you look at it, I often ask my clients to pick one or two to begin with that they're really aligned to and that they really, really care about and want to focus on. And it's hard to look at that and say, well, I care about education more than equality, for example, because they're all very important. So it's not so much about where do you care the most or what do you feel most passionate about. Where I try and get them to start is, where do you feel you can contribute the most? Now, contributing isn't just about donating financially. Obviously, when we talk about things like poverty, we do tend to think about some of the big charity initiatives. I think especially in this country, if you've grown up with things like Children in Need and Comic Relief, sometimes your head will go straight to making financial donations. But if you really think about it, that's not the only way you can tackle poverty. It's not the only way you can contribute. And likewise with hunger, you might think that means you need to donate to a charity that's tackling hunger. But actually, when you look at the targets that sit underneath the goals, so each goal has a set of targets and a set of indicators that the UN have put together to basically say, this is how we'll know that we're achieving that goal, because no hunger is such a big concept. It's broken down. And actually, part of no hunger is tackling food waste. So if you're composting at home, if you are, freezing stuff, if you're making an effort to really reduce your food waste, then you are actually having an impact towards that goal. And likewise in your business, if you're paying the living wage to the people that work for you, then you're having a contribution to decent work. I can't remember all the numbers. I made it my mission this year that I was going to learn the numbers and the titles of every goal, but decent work and economic growth is in there. So paying the living wage contributes to that, but it also is an important part of no poverty as well. So what you'll find when you focus on one or two is that you have a greater impact and you start noticing where you're making that impact, but you also see the crossovers between the goals as well, because they're all interlinked.
Yeah, I think what I've been trying to do is think about how I can impact them and how I can share them, because I do think some of them, as I said before, I did feel a bit overwhelmed. But as you say, when you look at the objectives underneath that big heading, number 8, by the way, is decent work and economic.
Okay, you got me in front of you.
I'm only because I've got the thing here. When I looked at the bits underneath that, I thought, actually, I can support my children to understand that when they go into the working world, there's certain ways in which, that their health should be cared for example, or we can talk about why we choose not to shop in certain shops or buy certain brands. Why we've made that choice as a family is because we don't like the way that company treats the people that make their products. And so, even though on the surface I don't feel I'm impacting decent work and economic growth, actually I am, because I do make those choices, and I perhaps could make more of those choices, or I could get more informed about those issues, and it would have an impact. And so the reason I think breaking them down and looking at them individually over this month is going to be quite helpful is because we can start to feel a bit less we can start to look individually and see, what can I do about that? How does my life have sort of feed into that? And I think that is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it is about what you're not doing as well. So, for example, when we talk about in the ethical fashion space, we talk about sweatshops. And this applies to a lot of other areas of kind of labour in the supply chain as well. But if you take sweatshops as an example, one of the arguments sometimes you'll come up against, if you say, I don't shop at that brand because they are known to be using sweatshops, or, they haven't signed the Modern Slavery Act, they haven't got a modern slavery policy or something like that. So we've actively, as a family, we don't buy from that brand. Sometimes people who don't get it will push back and say, well, at least somebody in a sweatshop has got a job. At least it's giving them an opportunity, and actually they might be living in poverty if they're not working in a sweatshop. So that's where the goals go hand in hand. So you've got zero poverty, number one, which obviously we want to achieve. We don't want people living in extreme poverty. We do want people to be paid, but it's also not fair to have them working in exploitative conditions and unsafe environments like we've seen with the Rana Plaza collapse that triggered the Fashion Revolution campaign. So actually it's still a good move to actually boycott those brands that are using sweatshops because they're not providing decent work. So it's actually about saying collectively, what kind of world do we want? Do we want a world where your only option to not live in poverty is to go to a really unsafe factory and work, a massively long shift with no toilet break, for example, or to have pregnant women at work stood on their feet all day and that kind of thing? So I think that's where you can engage with it at any level, and you can involve your children in it. Like you said, you can have that conversation as a family, because you can say, well, what would we like the future to look like? And then you can just use that as the starting point. What do we want that future to look like? And you might start saying, well, we want more trees, or we want more animals, or we want everybody to have equal opportunities, we want everybody to go to school, we don't want anyone to be hungry. And if you look at it from that point of view, which is how the goals were developed, that's how it came about, you can then look at, okay, well, how can we as a family help make that happen? And that's where the goals.
It has been very interesting, actually, and I do think children bring their own perspective, which is often quite refreshing. I find, adults are quite weighed down because we have so many things on our minds, and I think children are often a bit freer. Their brains aren't so full of mortgage repayments and shopping lists that they're they can be more creative thinkers, and it has been a really interesting experience to I think it's really important that we never burden children with adult issues. So it is it can be tricky to talk about some of these things, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it because it's tricky. We should do it carefully. Tell us a little bit about the book that you've taken part in, because that does break them down, doesn't it, into their individual parts.
It does, yeah. So it's called Legacy. The subtitle is The Sustainable Development Goals in Action. And it's coming out later this month, end of July, which is very exciting because it's obviously been quite a long time in the pipeline. But it's written by 52 different authors. So I'm one of 52 authors, which, as you can imagine, is a massive project. But it breaks down the Sustainable Development Goals. So each chapter focuses on a different goal. And then for each goal, there's 3 business owners who've written a contribution about how their business contributes to that goal. So it's their own backstory, their own journey. So we were asked the exact same thing that I asked my clients, of which goal do you really want to focus on? And it's a lot harder to be on the other side of it and you're not the one asking the question, to actually pick one. But my contribution is on goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. And again, for me, I was thinking, well, my business gives back to a lot of causes that are aligned to no poverty. I'm very big on collaboration for the goals because I'm all about kind of fostering this community and bringing people together and having campaigns like this that we're doing in July. But really, the core of my work around, marketing and selling products, selling services, it has to be about responsible consumption, because, we can't shop our way out of these problems. We can't shop our way out of climate change. So buying ethical fashion, buying, low waste products, buying plastic free, it's all very, very important. But actually, at the very heart of it, we need to buy less. And we need to embed circular economy and recycling solutions and things like that. So we actually fundamentally need to shift how we consume. And as a marketer, you're kind of trained and brought up in a world where your whole job is just about sell more stuff. So it was a big shift for me when I personally started living ethically, and I came to it through fashion. Had a bit of a light bulb moment, which you'll read about in the book, while I was traveling, about my consumption habits personally, and then how that related to my career, and a bit of an, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with my life? What have I been doing? And all of the guilt and shame and everything. So I talk about all of that in the book. But it really kind of explores, what is the role for marketers and what is the role for businesses that are producing stuff in a world where actually we need to buy less and make what we have last and do all of that good work to take care of the planet and the people involved as well.
Yeah, it can be quite complicated. I mean, I talk a lot about the importance of shopping locally and supporting independent business. And then in another breath, I think, and then I tell people not to buy and to shop secondhand and and I think, is that a really mixed message actually? Because can you do both? And I think for me, it's been about that consciousness. It's been about when I choose to buy new, which is quite rare, and then when I choose to buy secondhand, which is the majority, and how I can, in which ways I can support local and shop local and spend my money in a way that I'm comfortable with. without necessarily buying more than I need, or buying products I don't really use, or, you know, so I think it's about that consciousness, isn't it? And actually, you know, will that one pair of shoes that perhaps cost me more but will last me longer and has that ethical focus, I feel happy with that purchase. And so the other pair of shoes will be secondhand or borrowed or whatever. So it's finding that, and everyone will have a different balancing act around how they do that. But I think it can be done. I think it's really nice to have these conversations to help us all stop the guilt and the sort of panicking reaction to some of these big issues, and actually just talk about them, because not everyone's solution will be the same. I have a constant battle between, I don't buy organic, which will horrify lots of people, because I prefer to buy local. And I prefer to buy plastic free. And I think some of that is actually a numbers game for me, because there's 6 of us. So, you know, if our veggie box that comes is from a local supplier, mostly local products, obviously the pineapples aren't from Nottingham, but, you know, that feels better for our situation. I think if it was just the 2 of us and we were still living in London, the organic thing perhaps would be better. But I think, you know, it's not that there's a one solution fits all as well, and these conversations, I'm hoping, will help us all feel a bit more able to discuss it openly, you know, and come to our own sort of solutions for our little units.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's what the goals are really good at doing, is actually giving you a framework to have that conversation, you know, as a family, as a business, as a team, as a wider community, and say, well, here's where I feel really passionate. Here's what that means to me and how I'm going to have that impact. And somebody else might come at that a completely different angle. They might say, actually, I don't feel I've got anything to add to that goal. I don't understand it very much, you know, that because there are things in there that are quite technical. There's things like sustainable cities. So if you don't live in a city, if you're not in an industry that is involved in developing cities and urban spaces, that one might not be as relevant to you. But then it might be, actually, you know, when I do go to a city, I go by public transport. So I'm having an impact for life on land and climate action and sustainable cities. I'm using what's already there. I'm buying locally, so I'm supporting local businesses. And, you know, when you start to think about it, actually, you probably are contributing to a lot of the goals in a lot of different ways. But a good thing is to start noticing that. And like you said, just that consciousness. And part of it is actually breaking the habit of a lifetime. If you look around us, we're bombarded with advertising messages constantly trying to sell us more, make us buy more stuff, and do it from a place of actually our insecurities. So if you think about the women's beauty industry and all the products that are made up to tell us, you know, we need to look younger, we need to look more tanned, and we need to look a certain way, and all these products are developed purely to meet that made up need, actually it's tapping into what do we really need to feel happy and healthy and have good well-being and have this quality of life, and then breaking some of those habits. And I think that can be really hard to do. So having a community and having a safe space to have these conversations and say, you know, well, I feel like I'm doing really well here, let's celebrate that, and where could I do better here? I think that's really, really important.
Lovely. So the book's out at the end of July. Is it a read for, is it a sort of a read from the beginning to the end, or do you think people will dip in and out and perhaps focus on the ones that they feel closest to first?
So I think it can be read in a few different ways. Some of the feedback we've had from our early readers is that they couldn't put it down, which is great feedback, obviously, for being a co-author on the project, to hear the kind of the feedback that you would hear for a fiction book be applied to a non-fiction book is really, really positive and kind of life-affirming. But everybody's stories are individual, so I think you probably could dip in and out. You know, if you were to pick it up and say, climate action is my main focus, or responsible consumption is my main focus, I'm going to start there. I'm going to read everybody's story, and each chapter brings together those stories, but it also shares some practical tips for how you can embed that goal, not just in your business, but in your personal life as well. So things like, you know, you might want to host a clothes swap instead of going out and buying new clothes, for example. That could be one of the tips for my chapter. So I think it's going to be kind of a really practical I always call the goals a roadmap. I always say, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals aren't just a piece of policy, they aren't a piece of legislation, they are designed to be this living, breathing roadmap for how we're going to get to the better future we want to see. And what I love about the Legacy book is that it really aligns to that really closely, and it feels like that because it's showing them in action, which is what it says on the cover. So I hope that people will kind of use it and learn from it and dip in and out and put some of those tips into action as well.
So do you feel broadly quite, sorry, this is a question that's just occurred to me, feel free not to answer. Do you feel generally quite positive about the future then? Because there is this sort of, I think you could get quite depressed. You know, when I first heard that report saying we've got 12 years, you know, my kids won't even be in their 20s then. And that I found I sort of panicked a bit, and I felt quite down about that. And now I'm in a place where I'm picking myself back up and I'm thinking, what am I going to do about it? Which is giving me the oomph to move forward. But I think you know, we could get ourselves in quite a state about it. Where are you at? Are you feeling like we can do something about this if we all work together?
I feel like I've always been pretty positive and like, you know, we all need to do our bit and small steps will get us there. But I will admit, Claire, had a real crisis of faith around that when just before the climate emergency was declared and that report came out and it felt like nobody was doing anything, and not to get political, but everyone was banging on about Brexit and, you know, the state that kind of our news and our politics and everything was in. It felt like we were all just ignoring the elephant in the room that was this, you know, gloomy report that said we've got 12 years. And I think what I was struggling with when I was talking to people about that is usually the conversation around climate change, people say, well, it's about what kind of world are we leaving for our grandkids. But then actually when you read that report, it's not, it's our world. We'll still be alive then, you know, hopefully. And like you said, your children will be still very young. So actually it's not about what is our legacy for 6-7 generations down the line. It's happening here and now. And I did have a real moment of just like, we are doomed. But I think because I'm very fortunate that I work with people like you and people in our community who are really proactive, who are doing things, you know, we've had in the last couple of weeks, we've had the government reject all of the recommendations around the fast fashion report, which again is like, you've declared a climate emergency and now you're rejecting all of these environmental recommendations around one of the worst industries. It feels so frustrating to have the government not get on board and to have legislation not go through. But then on the other hand, I think that does motivate people like us to go, right, well, if you're not going to do it, I will. And actually, if enough of us take that action and enough of us start doing stuff, I do think that the consumers, in the cycle of things, the consumers individually don't have much power, but as a collective group, we have all the power because the corporations want us to spend our money and the politicians want us to use our vote. So actually, if we get together and we are really strong on what we want and the kind of world we want to see and how we want to put that into action, then they will follow us because they want us to either vote for them or spend with them. I am hopeful now.
Yeah, if you actually look at some of the biggest shifts, they haven't been government led, they've been cultural. You know, we've made it socially unacceptable to behave in certain ways, and that's, you know, that has been hasn't come sort of top down, that's come, you know, culturally up. And so I think people have forgotten how powerful they are. And I think I actually feel quite excited about the future because I feel people are getting that, you know, people are getting their mojo back about the power they hold, and we've sort of been a bit bamboozled, I think, for a couple of decades, you know, and feeling like bigger powers are in charge. And actually, I think I'm hoping that the feelings coming back that no, actually, you know, we've given them that power and we can remove it as well just as easily.
Exactly. And I think if you look at, like, plastic is a really good example, talking about plastic free July, you know, the legislation is coming now that there's going to be straws are going to be less available. There's not going to be plastic cotton buds and things. But actually months ago, we had the Stylist front cover, which had the cigarette packet with straws in. And actually we made it socially unacceptable to smoke in public places and to smoke in a car with a child in and things before, and to smoke around non-smokers before the legislation caught up. That had already happened. And then same with plastic straws. We've made it socially unacceptable that if you don't need a straw for accessibility issues, why are you using one? We've already, or why isn't it a reusable or a paper one? So we're already making it socially unacceptable. And then I think that stylist image of comparing them to cigarettes sent that really big signal of actually, you know, the society change has happened. Now it's time for the legislation to back that up. Because there will always be a small percentage of society who don't get on board with whatever change it is. And I think there is a place for legislation, like the use of single-use carrier bags massively dropped when the 5p charge was introduced here in the UK. So there is still a space for legislation, but we have to lead that and campaign for that. And if you look outside of our echo chamber, there's a lady called Gina Martin. I don't know if you've come across her, but she campaigned to make upskirting illegal because it happened to her at a festival, and she got on board with the legal side of it and how you get a bill through Parliament, and she pursued that. And if you know, it took her a long time, but a few months ago it was made illegal because she rallied a social campaign around that. She used social media, she used the audience of festival goers and the women that this had happened to, and she rallied a social movement and got it to the point where actually Parliament passed that bill, and it will be coming into law that it's illegal. So that just goes to show the power that we do have, like normal, individual, everyday people, when we work together, can make that change happen.
Yeah, it's quite an exciting time, I feel. I've sort of moved over that initial shock and fear, and now I feel I'm in a place of actual, this is a really good time to be alive. You know, we're in a place now where we can look back, hopefully, and go, we did that. You know, we saved it. And I think that's actually really, really exciting. So I'm hoping this month, as I say, it's not anti-plastic free July. I think that's awesome. And I hope loads of people do it and do that sort of audit of thinking, how do I shop and where do I shop and where does my plastic come from and what can I do about that? So it's not to go against that. It's really just to open up another conversation, hopefully 17 conversations over the month around what else is going on that needs our attention. So it's a really exciting time, and thank you so much for coming on board and supporting us with this, because I think, as you say, there's so much out there that we can be doing and probably are already doing. We perhaps haven't realised that we're taking part in this much bigger movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're already ahead on your plastic free journey and you know you really nailed it last plastic free July, and now you're thinking, what can I do next, then the Sustainable Development Goals is a really good place to start. But likewise, if you're at the very start of that journey, if you have those moments where you feel powerless and you think, you know, I'm working really hard to have less plastic and to be really mindful of it, but there's plastic everywhere, because I think it can be an overwhelming journey when you suddenly start to notice just how much plastic is in your life that you can't control. It's still a good idea to come to those goals and just take it in bite-sized chunks. You know, don't let it overwhelm you, but just think, actually, this is a really hopeful agenda for change. And if you do follow our hashtag for this campaign and you follow all the content that people are putting out there, you will start to see snippets of how people are embedding this in their everyday lives and in their work and in their businesses. So I'm going to be featuring on my Instagram at Ethical Hour, I'm going to be featuring different businesses that are working towards the goals every day until the book launches. And I'll be having a virtual book launch party, so you'll be able to find out about that and register for that on Instagram. But I think different people are going to come at it from different angles. So you'll find tips for doing it with your family, doing it for your household, and kind of whatever angle you want to come at it. But I think the main point for people to take away is there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's about the intention behind it and putting that intention into action.
Yeah, that's really important message. I do think sometimes the sort of green community can get a bit sniffy, and I think we need to be much more welcoming and supportive and helpful, because, you know, it doesn't really matter where you're starting. The point is that you do. You know, because everyone who even unconsciously starts thinking about these things is important, that we start those conversations. So I'm hoping it's going to be really accessible and fun and lots of tips and, you know, joyful stuff to get people on board. So as I say, thank you so much for your time today. I know Ethical Hours is in half an hour, so I know you've got lots that you're doing, and I hope you see you there as well. So we're going to be running this on all social media. I know Instagram is going to be a really big one. I'm old, so I still am using Twitter. And I'm going to be using it on our Facebook page as well, because I think it's, you know, wherever people are at, wherever their need is, where we need to be there, making those hopefully helpful information and messages. So thank you again, Sian. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to reading Legacy.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for having me, Claire. And I'm just looking forward to seeing this campaign unfold and watching everybody get involved. And I think just if anybody has questions about the SDGs, then please do post them. Please do ask. We want to make this as accessible as possible. So thank you for bringing us all together, and thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I'll see you through the month, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye now.